on new boilers and other upgrades for the duration of the 10-year transition. Next, he'll decarbonize public housing. Throughout the Green New Deal, we will electrify and decarbonize all public housing by conducting deep um, maybe about 20 minutes. Yeah, in about 20 minutes or so. It's okay now. Hi, everybody. How are you? Thank you for coming. This is Joe Firestone, and tonight I'm here for New Macro Media. For some reason, I have high CPU usage detected. I have no idea why. My setup is not any different than it has been. Let me see if I can find out why before we have trouble here. Okay, it seems to have gone down. I'm not sure what I did, but things seem to be much better now. So let us go forward. So today, Bernie Sanders released yet another new plan. And this new plan is for medical debt elimination. And like his other plans, it is really ambitious and aimed at ending injustice in our society. It's really amazing what has been coming out of his shop. So let's begin by looking at an article from Common Dreams, which kind of summarized things and announced his plan. And let me show this to you. There's the article from Common Dreams now, and we'll briefly go through it. So notice that he says the very concept should not exist. His plan is to wipe out all medical debt in the United States. The article was written by Julia Conley, who's a staff writer at Common Dreams. And she summarizes things. He's pledging to end the immoral and unconscionable practice of collecting debt from families who have endured an illness or hospital stay. Senator Bernie Sanders on Saturday, that's today, unveiled his plan to wipe out all medical debt in the United States. The Vermont independent senator and 2020 Democratic presidential candidate, they really rubbed it in there. The Vermont Independent Center and 2020 Democratic, the presidential candidate, has announced his proposal to eliminate the $81 billion in medical debt carried by American households. Days after asking his supporters on social media about the money they owed to debt collectors due to medical emergencies or illnesses they experienced in the past. The Sanders campaign heard back from more than 50,000 people who shared stories of the debts that have proven impossible to pay off sending their credit scores plummeting and affecting the daily lives of the families. And then the article goes over a number of tweets, uh, and so in a tweet entitled, well, I guess that's the handle, one step ahead of the queues, SOS. I'm not sure what that actually refers to, but the person, okay, is Artist Boy. And he replied to Bernie's call by saying, $35,000 for addiction treatment out of pocket. It's the best money I ever spent. But quality addiction treatment should not be limited by class. And he says addiction is treatable. Everyone deserves the opportunity. And then there are a number of other tweets. Amy Sterling, Casile was billed $20,000 after her baby died at Tarzana Medical Center. It's 15 minutes farther than the hospital where he was born when we were insured at that time by Kaiser. He choked on his formula and was unconscious, and then he died. So, on top of that tragedy, she had to endure a bill of $20,000. Laura Lappe says $35K to birth the baby. A $350 ambulance bill for my 28-year-old son who was 20 heartbeats from having a heart attack. Amazing. Bernie said the very concept of medical debt should not exist. In the wealthiest country in the history of the world, one illness or disease should not ruin a family's financial life and future. And he tweeted, 79 million Americans are burdened, okay, by medical debt for the crime, quote unquote, of getting sick. We're going to eliminate all past due medical debt. And then a few more, a few more paragraphs on general problem, okay, of medical debt. It contributes to 66% of bankruptcies in the United States. And nearly 80 million Americans report struggling to pay their medical expenses. And then Bernie also criticized the three major credit report companies, including Equifax, whose security breach left the personal and financial information of 140 million people exposed in 2017. Bernie plans to start a public start a registry which would replace the three major credit reporting agencies. And the registry would remove the profit motive from assessing the creditworthiness, okay, of American consumers. And Bernie would also bar medical debts from being included on credit reports and end the practice of credit checks for housing, job implications, and other non-lending practices. What a wonderful thing for people who have had to endure those credit checks, who just want to rent a home, who have the deposits, who have the ability to pay, but whose credit may have been poor in the past, and they've had to go through credit checks and be turned down. Quote, it is immoral and unconscionable that families across the country are finding themselves nearly broke or bankrupt because of crippling medical debt, while the healthcare industry made more than $100 billion in profits last year. He said, my administration will take on the greed of the healthcare industry. Plan won praise on social media. There was a tweet by Rebecca Traister, who, if I'm not mistaken, was a Hillary Clinton supporter in 2016. There are lots of kinds of debts that are immoral, exploitive, and deeply unjust. And several presidential candidates are addressing that aggressively. But I could not agree more wholeheartedly with this that medical debt should absolutely not exist. I guess that got to Rebecca Traister. Tara Golshan said, the very bottom of Bernie Sanders' medical debt plan feels very huge. He wants to replace companies like Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian with a public credit registration through the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. He wants to put them out of business. And Zini Jardin tweets, I haven't had good credit since cancer. He says, might have a score of 800 with this. Except, I'm not sure there are going to be scores anymore. Scores might just be prohibited. So let's get to the bill. Look more closely at it. Let me check and see that the transition was smooth. Yes, I guess it was. Thanks. So, here's the plan itself. Here are the details. So, of course, he mentions that the past due medical bills total 81 billion. Says the largest share of that is held by 27-year-olds who lose access to their parents' insurance after age 26. It says 25% of 24 to 55-year-olds have outstanding medical debt. And points out that 79 million Americans struggle to pay their medical bills or are paying off medical debt, including half of those making less than $40,000 per year. He says last year alone, 8 million people were pushed into poverty due to medical expenses. So let me leave the plan for a minute and check on how you're doing on Facebook. Not set up to do both at the same time. So Gregory Mallard says, oh, by the way, thanks everyone for joining me tonight. Pretty important plan. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Dale. Hi, Lana. Hi, Russell Goldman. Hey, Johnny, nice to see you. And Gregory Mallard has joined. And nice to see you, Greg, also. Johnny says he's going through Restream or live on Facebook where he responds to the comments. Just curious. I'm live on Facebook right now. I'm not going through Restream. I was having some technical difficulties with that. So I shifted to Facebook, and all I'm doing now is after I finish the Facebook, I'm loading up to YouTube. And I can now do that in just a few minutes because my downloads are going very, very fast. So it doesn't take too long. So that's the answer, Johnny. So Gary Houck has joined. Dale says, yeah, Johnny, these things are pretty interactive. And Greg says shared. And Dale says, usually at the end, Doc responds to all questions, comments. Russ says, looks good on this end. Thank you, Russ. Gary says, so good to be here, but must leave soon. I think he means can't wait to watch tomorrow. Greg says, you're coming in fine from my end, Dr. Joe. Thank you, Greg. Ann Barney's joined. She's here too. Russ says, I really like how Barney continues to up the convo as the other candidates mimic his ideas. Yeah, me too. I mean, he's basically challenging them to come out for economic and social justice in every way conceivable. It's amazing. Greg says Bernie always turns things up a notch. He has the best economics advisor ever. It's not just okay, his economics advisor. He does that. Okay, it's Stephanie, of course, but he also has, I think, a team of economists. Okay, to consult, and I think in many instances he's been planning these things for years. This is not new. He's been thinking this through now for a very long time. I mean, he's seen year after year the extension of the tyranny of debt to Americans. And I'm telling you, he's been burned up about it. He was burned up about the 2005 bill, the bankruptcy prevention bill. Joe Biden was instrumental in passing that. I'll bet Bernie was totally pissed off about that and was thinking about what he could do about it from that day until this. And Greg Mallard says, okay, medical debt should never be placed on credit checks or even be factored into credit scores. And according to Bernie's bill, it won't be. Teresa Sanders has joined. Hey, Teresa, nice to see you. Johnny says, I have zero medical debt, but I will support and fight for this because guess what? It's about me. It's not about me. It's about us. Yeah, Johnny, it's about us. It's about all of us. Susan Eldridge has joined. Hi, Susan. And Greg says credit scores were created to keep more people in poverty. And Russ says apparently my friend who died of cancer in March of this year had 20-something credit cards, but while carrying some 92,000 in debt on them. His cancer lasted for 4 years. For 4 years. Terrible, just terrible. And Greg Mallard said that's why we need a single payer healthcare system that doesn't leave anyone behind. Everybody in, nobody out. Universal single payer healthcare system. And my daughter Devora has joined. Hi, honey. And Bruce Cassie Carlisle is here and says Bernie for Prez. And Teresa Sanders says, I think we should start talking about corporate treason. Pretty easy to use the Powell memos the Powell memo back in, when was it, Teresa? 1973. The recommendations that have been slow, they have been slowly implementing since the 70s. Just follow their actions and use it against them. And Dave Phelps is here. Hiya, Dave. And Susan Eldridge says hi. Okay, I'm going back to the plan now. I'll check in again with you later. Let's see. Let me show you the plan once again. Should be coming up on your screens anytime now. So, where were we? Last year alone, 8 million people were pushed into poverty due to medical expenses. Nearly half of Americans fear a major medical event could lead to their bankruptcy, according to Gallup. And one out of every four people in America said sometime in the past year they had skipped the treatment because of concerns about cost. And right now, medical debt's the leading cause of consumer bankruptcy in America. And he quotes that other wonderful statistic: 66.5% of all bankruptcies are connected to medical issues, both because of the skyrocketing cost of care and because of a patient's time away from work and the subsequent expenses and lack of income. And he mentions the 500,000 people in bankruptcy each year. He says, and the true number may be far higher. In fact, we know that the true number last year was at least 530,000. Poor credit caused by illness can condemn families to cycles of further indebtedness. It can destroy credit scores, which in turn can force families to pay more in rent, make it harder to purchase a vehicle, force them to pay outrageous interest rates to payday lenders, and force families to forego necessary medical care. Yeah, a whole bunch of things, okay, are intersected here. And it gets people into a syndrome of debt. And often it's started by medical debt. And then that leads to all kinds, okay, of other debts. Uh, Having nothing to do with the moral character of the families involved. In other words, that this is, is not a morality issue. They trapped, okay, by low wages. They get sick. Oh, then medical debts get very high, and then everything else begins to fall apart. It's a vicious circle. It is immoral and unconscionable that families across the country are being evicted, having their heat disconnected, or having their already inadequate wages garnished because of crippling medical debt, while the healthcare industry made more than $100 billion in profits last year. And the promise: when Bernie is in the White House, he will fight to make sure that no one in America goes bankrupt because of medical debt, and he's going to eliminate all past due medical debt in this country. Okay, and here he goes with some other paragraphs concerning that, but I'm going to scroll down a little bit here and just get to what he's going to do as president. And as president, Bernie will eliminate the 81 billion in past due medical debt. Under this plan, the federal government will negotiate and pay off past due medical bills and collections that have been reported to the credit agencies. Uh, he's also going to end the abusive and harassing debt collection practices that we've been seeing. He's going to prohibit the collection of debt after the statute, okay, of limitations kicks in. I'm not sure what that particular time period is. It may be 7 years. Okay, at this point, I don't know. And my daughter sent a reminder through my wife. So he's going to significantly limit the contact attempts per week, okay, that a collector can make to an individual through any mode of communication, regardless of how many bills are in collection. He's going to require collectors to ensure that information about a debt is fully accurate before attempting to collect. He's going to substantially limit the assets that can be seized and the wages that can be garnished in collection to ensure consumers do not lose their homes, jobs, or primary vehicles and will be able to financially support their families. He's going to instruct, catch this one, he's going to instruct the IRS to review the billing and collection practices of the nearly 3,000 nonprofit hospitals to ensure they are in line with the charitable care standards for nonprofit tax status, and order the IRS, that is, to take action against those who are not. Taking action probably includes some warnings, but if they fail to heed those warnings, it's going to include removing their nonprofit tax status, for sure. He's going to use the bankruptcy courts to process other existing and future medical debt. The so-called Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act of 2005 was a disastrous piece of legislation that benefited Wall Street and the credit card companies while causing severe economic pain and financial distress for ordinary Americans throughout the country. The study of its impacts found that the bankruptcy bill made it harder for patients to discharge medical debt through bankruptcy after a hospital stay, especially for uninsured patients. And during the debate, then Senator Joe Biden was one of only 3 Democrats to vote against an amendment that would have exempted those with serious medical debt from the draconian means test. Yes, Joe Biden has been a serious representative of the credit card companies and the banking industry for years and years and years. They're among his largest donors, and they were at that time. And when around that time, it was said by Dick Durbin that the banks and credit card companies own this place. Durbin was thinking about senators like Joe Biden. So this part of it is a hit on Joe Biden. Make no mistake about that. The bankruptcy bill reinforced and strengthened a rigged financial system that disproportionately harms African American borrowers and makes debt relief and forgiveness harder to obtain. Not only must we eliminate past due medical debt, we must also reform our corrupt bankruptcy system to make it easier to discharge medical bills put on credit cards and other forms of payment, and ensure This debt does not follow patients going forward. Of course, if the Medicare for All bill passes, then there won't be any new debt either. But this part of his bill will handle the hangover of debt. In other words, the debts that have not been reported to the credit agencies that are not publicly as yet, but still exist. Those debts can be addressed through this part of his bill. So, in the action end of things, as president, Bernie will reform the Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act of 2005 to use the existing bankruptcy court system to provide relief for those with burdensome but debt, actually medical debt. If I can give some advice to Bernie here, don't reform the act, just repeal it and restore the status quo. It was a travesty on consumers. In other words, not to have the protections, of bankruptcy anymore. All businesses have the protections, of bankruptcy. What arrogance for the Congress to remove those protections from consumers. That's when we knew, when they passed that act, that's when we really knew that the Congress was bought, lock, stock, and barrel. Anyway, he's going to eliminate means testing requirements to file for bankruptcy. He's going to allow for the adjudication, including potential discharge of debt, including interest and penalties, stemming from direct payments to providers and insurers for medical expenses, assuming documentation. This includes medical debt incurred on credit cards or any other consumer debt product. He's going to end the onerous and regressive credit counseling required before filing to discharge medical debt. In other words, that's not going to exist anymore. You can just declare bankruptcy when you want to declare bankruptcy. You won't have to get any counseling. Next, include broad automatic stay protections, placing an immediate prohibition on any evictions, utility interruptions, foreclosure proceedings, wage garnishments, driver's license suspensions, and other actions. So, in other words, filing for bankruptcy is again going to protect consumers. And last, prohibit requiring the disclosure of any discharges of medical debt on housing loan or other applications. That's going to prevent any medical debt at discharge from dogging people in years to come. That also is wonderful. Okay, next section, he talks about the registry, a public credit type of a registry. And he says, our current lending system relies on three major unsecured for-profit credit agencies to determine the credit worthiness. In 2017, the credit reporting agency Equifax suffered a breach that exposed the personal information of more than 140 million Americans. Instead of having any material consequences, Equifax's CEO retired with a $90 million payday. Tens of millions of American consumers have incorrect information on their credit reports, which can prevent them from receiving home loans, rental apartments, or good jobs. Credit scores also systematically perpetuate gaps in wealth inequality between white and minority consumers. For millions of Americans, one unforeseen medical emergency or illness could send a family into financial destitution or a spiraling debt trap. We must and we will remove the profit motive from assessing the credit worthiness of American consumers. We'll establish a public registry that will end racial biases in credit scores and ensure those with medical debt are not penalized for the quote crime unquote of getting sick. As president, Bernie will remove and exclude medical debt from existing credit reports. He's going to create the registry we've been talking about to replace for-profit credit reporting agencies. He's going to put them out of business, folks. This registry will use a public, transparent algorithm in order to determine credit worthiness that's going to eliminate racial biases in credit scores. But the other thing it's going to do, since the algorithm is going to be transparent, we will all know what kinds of things can get us into trouble with our credit scores and what kinds of things will not. That's going to help people to prioritize their payments. Next, it's going to allow Americans to receive credit scores for free. And it's going to prohibit any medical debt from being included in the process of computing credit scores, okay, of individuals. So I guess there still will be credit scores, but the way they compute it is going to be transparent, and no medical debt is going to be included. Next and last, Bernie's going to end the use of credit checks for rental housing, employment, insurance, and other non lending practices. In other words, credit checks will only be used for lending, only be used by banks for lending purposes. People will not be able to use them for employment or to decide whether or not they want to rent a house, okay, or an apartment to you. They won't be used by insurance companies any longer to price you out, okay, of insurance markets. It's going to make things much, much easier for consumers. So I'm going to go back and check out what you think of all this now. Okay, Devorah says, hi, Pop. Susan Eldridge says, someone told me they were paying $500 a month for Medicare. Oh, wait a minute. Let me look at my monitor here. Susan says someone told me they were paying 500 a month for Medicare. That includes Medicare, including a Medicare Advantage plan. I think that's possible. I can tell you, what Bonnie and I pay. We have a Medicare Plus plan from Kaiser, and from Medicare, of course. Uh, Between the two sources of insurance, the U.S. government, and Medicare, and Kaiser, we are approaching 500 a month, for us as a couple. I think it's more like $480 a month. But last time I figured it out, that's what it costs, and we still have deductibles, and we still have copays. The $500 a month is just for Medicare premiums, which we're paying, at this point, of course, and for the Kaiser premiums. So for seniors, a fairly low income, such as ourselves, when we switch to Bernie's plan, uh, since there are no premiums for that particular plan, most likely, however he chooses to pay for it, is not going to impact us, and we'll probably save the $500 a month. That comes to $6,000 a year. That means a lot to us. We'll also probably save another $1,000, which we currently pay for copays, uh, and for deductibles, and for pharmaceuticals, for copays, on our pharmaceuticals, and for dental. Uh, so, I mean, we're talking $7,000 a month just for us as a couple, and we are pretty healthy for seniors. We're living in a senior development actually right now, and we know a lot of people who have significantly greater medical problems than we have. They're always getting exposed, to deductibles, to copays, but to medication costs. Uh, I don't know how they're covering their bills, but I know they'll probably save $4,000 to $5,000 per person, and probably much more if they get into a serious illness, a situation where the deductibles and copays, are very high. And so Jay Elias has joined us. And says, "Hey Joe," and Randy Hedgebeth has joined. Kathy Langan has joined. Dale Adams has joined. Nice to see you, Dale. Nice to see you, Kathy. Nice to see you, Randy. And nice to see you, Steve Gonzo's also joined. And Leif Hansen Magnuson has joined as well. Hi, Leif. Nice to see you, too. Susan Eldridge says, people want to know if their taxes will go up, with Medicare for All. Look, I want to put that to rest, for good. Your taxes are not automatically going to go up if a Medicare for All plan is passed. There are a number of reasons for this. First of all, it's quite likely that the cost that federal and state governments together pay for health care right now is going to stay approximately the same, or at most go up, okay, a couple of $100 billion a year. Okay, what I'm talking about here is this. This year, 2019, national health expenditures are probably going to reach $3.8 trillion. That's what the projections are saying. We know from costing that was done a couple of years ago, actually, we know that the federal and state governments are currently laying out for healthcare something like $2.5 trillion per year. It's probably even um, uh, 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 a little higher than that. We also know that Canada is spending 11% of its GDP now. We're spending nearly 18%. If we can develop the efficiency of Canada, and maybe we can do better. A lot of other countries are doing better. If we can get to 11% of GDP, that would bring us down to something like maybe $2.4 trillion or $2.3 trillion. So the point is, we'd be spending less than we're spending now. So, but apart from that, the way the Medicare for All bill should be passed is it should be passed as a clean bill. The money should be appropriated for it as a clean bill. The pay-fors should be handled separately. The tax bill should be handled separately from the appropriations bill because taxing is a separate process. It shouldn't be tied, or earmarked specifically to Medicare for All, or specifically to defense, or specifically to anything else. The reason for that is because taxing is not about actually paying for things. It's about taking money out of the private sector to hedge against inflation. So, how much are we going to have to tax to pay for the whole federal budget? Okay, I can't say. But if our taxes have to go up, it won't be because, of Medicare for All. It might be because we're spending too much, on armaments. It might be because we're also spending on a Green New Deal. It might be because we're also spending a tremendous amount on infrastructure because we've allowed our infrastructure to go to hell over the years. We might have to tax more because we're doing so much and we have to hedge against inflation. And so that's why we would raise our taxes, but not to pay for Medicare for All. So what I'm saying to you is that whether we choose to raise our taxes or not involves a separate political process. If we don't want our taxes to go up, they don't have to go up. If we agree that it makes sense to raise our taxes because we want to hedge against inflationary pressures, then we can all agree to do that. We can all agree to support Congress people who are being cautious about that. Okay, but all I know is that if we were interested in passing a true full employment budget, we would probably be willing to have deficits of at least 12%, okay, of GDP. Okay, now even under Trump, I think our deficits are rising into what, the 5 or 6% range right now, or something like that. We aren't running deficits that are high enough. That's one of the reasons why we don't have true full employment. Yes, I know the unemployment rates are very low, but that's because the U3 statistic is bogus. It measures unemployment, okay, in the wrong way. There are better measures, okay, of unemployment. When we use those other measures, we are not near true full employment. Susan says, what is the IRMA rule for Medicare? Oh, that's vaguely familiar to me from sometime back in the 1970s. I think I heard about some kind of an IRMA rule. But I confess that I don't know what kind of IRMA rule is in place, okay, at this time. I haven't heard about, okay, an IRMA rule for a long time. What do I think about the funding section of the current bills? I think they're terrible because the way a lot of the current funding works is that it's based on the principle of how are we going to pay for this, how are we going to pay for that, and many things. We often have appropriations bills that incorporate some tax provisions. I don't think we should be doing that. I think we should be separating the appropriations process from the taxing process and taking a macroeconomic point of view to both of those things and deciding on a holistic basis how much we're going to tax as a percent, okay, of GDP and how much we're going to spend as a percent, okay, of GDP. I think that's a proper way to do it. The two processes should be divorced. Since 1974, they've been lumped together. Since the CBO was founded, the CBO is a travesty. We need to greatly change, okay, and reform it. And we have to completely get rid, okay, of pay go stuff. Anyway, Susan says, House and Senate bill have a Medicare trust fund section. Yeah, I know they have a Medicare trust fund section. Okay. I think the trust fund is an accounting record. Okay. It doesn't have any money in it. It doesn't really fund anything. It's a myth that the trust funds are funding things. It's a myth. And the reason why I say it's a myth is because nothing gets funded without the House and Senate passing an appropriations bill. The Medicare spending gets funded by an appropriation. It doesn't get funded by the trust fund. So the trust fund is a convenient accounting gimmick, but as a funding mechanism, it's a fiction. It doesn't fund anything. It keeps a record of the Medicare contributions that were collected by the Treasury and that functionally serve as taxes. That money was destroyed. It was destroyed in the process, okay, of settlement. No money exists in those trust funds. What exists in those trust funds is just an accounting record. There are no reserves there, no bank reserves. It's not a trust fund in that sense. If you have a trust fund which resides in a bank, there are reserves in that trust fund. Yes, I know. That too is only an accounting record. However, that accounting record can be transferred all over the economy by banks, okay, in various ways. It's money. Those reserves are money. But what's in the Medicare Trust Fund is not money. It's just an accounting record that sits there. And if Congress failed to make the Medicare appropriation for next year, then there wouldn't be any Medicare payouts. Doesn't matter how much money is in the trust fund. Conversely, if we had a situation where the trust fund was out of funds, had nothing in it, and Congress decided to appropriate the Medicare spending anyway, then the Medicare spending would occur, whether or not there's any dollars in the trust fund. So that's what I think of the funding section of the current bills. The current funding section of the current bills is maintaining a fiction that comes from the way Social Security was funded, and that comes also from the way in which the Medicare program, okay, was initially funded before we shifted over to a fiat currency system. Even then, though, there were no funds in the Social Security Trust Fund. There was no bank holding reserves. It was just an accounting record. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so my general evaluation is this is another great thing that Bernie is doing. He comes out with great new things now almost every week. And they're carefully thought through. They look like they're very sound pieces, okay, of legislation that he's putting in for. He looks like he's trying to create a just a society, and that he is tackling every issue of social and economic justice that we see before us. And he's putting forward a plan for that. And he doesn't seem to be forgetting anything. He's going for comprehensive structural change. He's going for remaking American society. That's what he's about. He's focused on the Green New Deal, sure, But even more broadly than the Green New Deal, he's focused on creating the just society that we all dream of. That's what he's doing. Let's take a look for a minute. Let's go back to the screen and let's take a look at the issues. The issues on Bernie's campaign website. Bernie Sanders on the issues. I'm going to share the page with you again. Okay. So you should get it in just a minute. There's a little delay between what I'm doing here, okay, and when it comes to you. So I'll scroll down now. Okay, remember the Medicare for All plan. Okay, it's in legislation now. I've gone through it in detail. I've also critiqued it. I don't think it's quite as good as the House bill, but it's very, very good. Then there's the Green New Deal, the best of the Green New Deal programs so far envisioned. The best. The College for All program. That's free college for all program. The Workplace Democracy program, which is great in itself. In a previous video, I've gone over that. I went over the College for All the College for All program. I just went over the Housing for All program. Should have said Housing Justice for All. I just went over that on Thursday. Okay. His plan for expanding Social Security, which is wonderful, so much better than Warren's. There's the Bill of Rights, the 21st century economic Bill of Rights, the successor to FDR's economic Bill of Rights. The Justice and Safety for All program about criminal justice reform, the most comprehensive program that's yet been advanced by anybody. The Reinvest in Public Education program, again, the most comprehensive program of its kind. Now, the Eliminating the Medical Debt program. The Fair Banking for All program, with its institutionalizing of postal banking once again, making banking services open to all. The Racial Justice program, the most comprehensive yet envisioned. The Free and Fair Elections program, the Revitalizing Rural America program, an extremely comprehensive program, really wonderful. And then, of course, caring for our veterans. This is the most comprehensive agenda for producing social and economic justice that we see before us today. No other candidate of the major parties equals this agenda. Now, there's been a lot of trouble in getting this agenda out. And the reason why there's been trouble about it is that the mainstream media don't want this to come out. They don't want you to understand what his whole program is, how great it is, how the agenda is, what the purpose of the agenda is, how comprehensive it is, how much of a change it is for America in creating a social democracy. It will create the social democracy we have never had before. It will complete the work that was started by FDR and abandoned by the Democrats um, um, after the 1960s. The party went the wrong way after the 1960s. It lost its way. Now, people say Sanders is an independent, that he's not actually a Democrat. That is not true. He is more of a Democrat, capital D Democrat, and small d Democrat, than any of these other bozos. Because he's the only one who's expanding the vision of FDR. That vision that FDR didn't have a chance to complete because he died too soon. He's the only one embracing that vision and expanding it to the whole population and even beyond to the immigrants as well. So I wanted you to hear that. I wanted you to understand that. And on that note, since I don't see any more comments, I think I'm just about ready to say goodnight. I do want to remind you to please share, like, and subscribe. And please become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. I'll say goodnight now and have a wonderful rest of the weekend. I'll be back on Monday. Until then, enjoy.